Get in on the action this season with Underdog's Pick'em game. Select higher or lower between 2 and 8 players and compete for up to 325 times your entry. Use code DIRECTOR when signing up to receive up to $1,000 in bonus cash and a free pick. Go to Bowl fam, it's the Director. Chargers fans, it has been a very eventful offseason. Preseason, I think, has been a lot of hype. Chargers fans are very excited for kickoff coming up very, very soon. There's new rookies all over the roster. Chargers looking like they got something going here. But, you know, we also got to talk every once in a while about maybe some of the more unfortunate parts of the game, and that does include cuts. A lot of competition this season, man. There's some pretty good undrafted free agents, rookies, even drafted late, that are fighting for roster spots that look pretty good, if I'm being honest. And there's going to be some guys that may be left on the cutting floor. If you know, it's a movie reference, okay? It's nothing violent. But that does bring me to our conversation today. Who are some Chargers maybe in danger of being cut? And what is that going to make the roster look like as we do get closer to the regular season? And it's going to be, I don't know, maybe some of them are going to be a little bit surprising, shocking. We'll have to wait and see. You guys got to let me know in the comment section below some of the guys you do think as well may be cut, like Joey Bosa was earlier, one of the toughest cuts I've seen in a while, but it made a lot of sense, and maybe we see some of those on today's list as well. Before we do get into things, man, shout out to the sponsor, Underdog. Use code DIRECTOR to receive up to $1,000 in bonus cash. There's an awesome promo going on right now, too, guys. You put 50 in, you get 50 in bonus funds, man. That's pretty awesome, especially for you, some of you guys that want to get your feet wet with the preseason, kind of learn what the platform is like. That's definitely one I would recommend taking advantage of while we got it. Before we do kick off, hit us up with a like and sub if you do enjoy this Chargers content. The small amount of time you guys take to hit the like, sub, and bell notification helps me out a lot. Let's get into this one. Lights, camera, action.
Who's got it better than us?
Into the end zone, Charger fans are witnesses to history!
I got 7 cut candidates for the Chargers this season, and it's coming up, man. It's going to be a tough one for Jim Harbaugh. There's a lot of guys on the roster that I think are looking good. The team has become deeper, I think, at a lot of positions. There's some that really need some help. I think interior offensive line is a whole, defensive line, the trenches, which is crazy to think when we brought on Jim Harbaugh, you know, what it's looking like now. But on other positions, you know, running back, wide receiver, corner, there's a lot of depth out there, man. And it's going to be tough to figure out who you're keeping, who's hopefully going to make it onto the practice squad and not get poached by other teams. It's going to get crazy. And it's going to get crazy soon. Like I said, this is coming up, man. I think next week, is it the 26th, if I recall correctly? That is the deadline in which NFL teams need to trim their rosters down to just 53. I think they need to move that number up, dude. They got to figure out a way to get more players to stay on the roster, especially as we are increasing the number of games played in the NFL. We're probably going to see 18 at any day now, so I don't know. But the deadline's coming up. Chargers got to figure out who they're keeping, who they're cutting. Here's some guys I think are on the roster bubble in danger of getting cut because of maybe the talent that we're seeing ascend from, you know, other parts of the roster. Here comes the first one. It's Taylor Heinicke. This one, it could go either way. I think the Chargers might be shopping him. If I were them, I can't speak for him, but if it were me and the Chargers' backup running back room was looking the way it did, I maybe would look to other teams to see if someone wants to throw, you know, like a 7th or 6th round pick for Taylor Heinicke to trade over for his services as a backup quarterback. Because when we signed him last year, I thought it was a pretty solid addition for that QB2 spot. Of course, we had Easton Stick back then. Things didn't look quite as solid as they do now, especially. But it wasn't a bad signing back then. Now Heinicke sees his role in danger because of another quarterback that we signed, and that's in large due part to the emergence of course, Trey Lance. Dude, Trey Lance has been absolutely so awesome this offseason. He's one of those guys that we kind of called early. The Bolts have been pretty good at taking these guys that maybe weren't so good, didn't live up to potential, more of a bust, you know, and then give them new life on this team. It's been awesome. And Trey Lance and his emergence, that's been pretty crazy. You know, he's been absolutely electric when on the field. He's, you know, been winning over the fans, myself, and I'm sure the coaching staff as well. And then meanwhile, Heinicke, he's not looked very good. Matter of fact, he looks pretty bad in his first start or whatever versus the Saints in week 2. It was pretty dreadful. He just completed one pass for 8 yards in 5 attempts. It seemed like every decision there was a lot of rust that he was shaking off, and unfortunately, that did not bode well for him. And then on the other side of the spectrum, once Lance took over the offense, I think in the second quarter, sometime right before the second half, the offense looked alive again. And I think the Chargers and its fans, everybody, we're kind of all leaning towards this Trey Lance being quarterback 2 narrative, which is definitely not great for Heinicke. And even if we were to trade him, there are some moments, I think, in his defense, he did look better in this game versus the Rams. He took off for several yards on the ground, completed more passes. He looked a lot better in this game, which tells me maybe there was a lot of rust being shaken off in that Saints game. But once again, even in this game, once Lance took over the offense, he just offered a better performance in the second half. So to wrap it up, I do think that if Heinicke isn't traded soon, he may end up being cut by the team next week, which is pretty crazy. And I'm sure he'll get scooped up right away. But I have a feeling that there's somebody out there that'd be willing to give up, a 7th round pick for a still pretty decent quarterback too, like the Titans or somebody. But Heinicke, yeah, his situation definitely changed overnight with Trey Lance looking very good this offseason. Next up, we got Jalen Reagor. Now, this is as a product of the Chargers wide receiver room. It's looking pretty packed all of a sudden. Again, like backup quarterback for a long time hadn't felt pretty good for the Chargers. Now all of a sudden it's deep, and we're looking to cut some decent players. The wide receivers are exactly the same way. Last season it was pretty bad. This season, man, there's a lot of good players on this team, mainly the rookies that we signed on. And then also, especially after signing Keenan Allen, right? It's pretty packed in there. Reagor, when he was signed, the Chargers wide receiver room was very much so struggling. It did not look like the way it did today. Ladd McConkey was in need of help every single week, and admittedly, I think Reagor had a few flashes. He had a couple of games where it's like, okay, he's looking better than his previous stints with the Patriots and the Vikings. But the position all of a sudden, again, looks very deep, especially with the rookies, Trey Harris, Keandre Lambert-Smith, now ascending, not just being there and being drafted, but they are ascending. They're looking pretty good. There's other guys like Campbell and Grimm and these other guys that are probably looking better than him so far, at least from what we've heard in camp. So I think there's a slim chance that Reagor makes the team. Probably one of the more expected cuts on this video. Another wide receiver that does have a lot of competition, and he does carry a very unique narrative, one that Chargers fans have been rooting for, but I don't know how much it's materialized since then. Of course, that's Brandon Rice, who was a 7th round pick of the Chargers in 2024. He looked like he carried tremendous upside, of course, because of the legacy play. His pops being Jerry Rice, coming from USC, it looked like there was a lot of potential here. And I got to see a lot of that in person in training camp last year. He looked like he got off to a pretty good start, but he hasn't really shown much after that. I haven't really seen much growth or improvement since that training camp period. He even got a few opportunities in the regular season, of course. I don't think that they really materialized into anything. They really came up empty, is what I'm trying to say. In those games, and it just doesn't feel like there's been enough to move the needle. He's made a few nice plays in the preseason. I will admit he's had a few nice plays in camp, but I don't think it's going to be enough to make the roster. And again, like I said, there's many names like Luke Grimm, Devon Campbell that are really pushing for a spot. That might be enough to push Brandon Rice out. Next up, a cornerback who in the past has had some pretty good games, right? I felt like in his rookie season, maybe even follow-up season, there's a lot of instances where you're like, okay, we got a nice value in Jasir Taylor, who was drafted late in the Brandon Staley era. And it does make this a tricky one because it sounds like the coaching staff today still feels like he's a good player. And he might be. Maybe he had a couple of bad games. Who knows? But earlier in the offseason, Jesse Minter, he did mention that Jasir Taylor was one of the most improved players on the roster, right? But throughout the preseason, he's looked very inconsistent to me. Sure, he's made some good tackles, I will say that, and that's something the Jesse Minter defense really does value. You want a guy out there at DB that can tackle. But in terms of being in coverage, it's just not looked good. You know, he actually looked pretty terrible in this last game versus the Rams. He committed a face mask penalty. I remember that being a pretty big one. He allowed that Hail Mary that ended up setting up the Rams to win that preseason game, and then also allowed the 38-yard touchdown versus the Rams. That game was absolutely abysmal, unfortunately, for Ja'Sir Taylor, as we do get closer to the cut deadline. And, you know, with rookies like, I'm going to name specifically Nico Reed standing out, I definitely think that his spot is in danger. So Ja'Sir Taylor, probably one of the bigger names that could get cut. And I think, you know, from what I'm seeing, it's a possibility. But who knows? Maybe what Jesse Minter said is true. He just had a really bad game versus the Rams. But again, it's tough. There's a lot of guys pushing for a roster spot that I think look pretty good. Speaking of cornerbacks, another one that was just drafted, Trikweze Bridges, one that I was actually pretty excited about. The Chargers drafted Bridges in the 7th round this year, and I liked his upside. 6'2", decent speed, physical, the perfect Madden Ultimate Team golden ticket. You know what I mean? Like, that's exactly what you're looking for. And that's something on the perimeter that the Chargers could certainly use this season. But he's looked, for a lack of a better term, pretty lost this preseason in these games. He's like Ja'Sir Taylor. I think he's been a decent tackler. I think you've seen, you know, some decent traits from him there, but in terms of coverage, he's getting completely burned for some big plays. I remember at least 1 or 2 touchdowns in the area of Trikweze Bridges, and I remember there was one route in particular. It was a dig route or a stop and go on the sideline, and Bridges, man, that dude got lost like 5 yards in the wrong direction, and I was like, ooh, that was pretty bad. And although I'll admit there's potential, hopefully he can stick around on the practice squad. It just feels like there's a lot of rookies vying for his spot, right? And in particular, like I said, Nico Reed to Ja'Sir Taylor, I'm going to say Eric Rodgers, in particular to Trikweze Bridges, who had that spectacular game versus the Saints, 2 picks, 1 returned for a touchdown. That's something that honestly feels a little bit more exciting, you know what I mean, at the end of the day. And Rodgers fits a similar profile to Bridges. I think he's also 6'2" and has that speed. I think he could end up being the better ad, but this could all depend on Rodgers' availability. You know, obviously, he's not going to be ready right now for this next preseason game. We saw that injury at the end of the Saints game. Hopefully, he can come back soon, and the Chargers can keep him around. But if that recovery looks good, and it looks like maybe he can come back for the first week of the season, and there's room on the back of the roster, I think it would be Rodgers over Trikweze Bridges at this point. And again, hopefully Bridges can stick around in the practice squad, because again, I like those attributes on him. But it just feels like Eric Rodgers may be one of those diamonds in the rough, and we saw a lot of proof of that in that Saints game. All right. These next 2 guys, I'm going to be honest, these ones are pretty big. And this one's really tough for me because I love these next 2 players. But every single season, we see a player that none of us predicted, right? We see a player that, holy crap, like, how, you know, this guy out of everybody, like, what happened? And in the Jim Harbaugh era, maybe it turns out to be the right call. This first player is Kamani Vidal. Now, the Chargers are becoming a very serious run team. Okay, last season, I think we kind of skeeted by. I loved J.K. Dobbins. I loved his story. I think Gus Edwards was great. But both of them, their availability kind of sucked, you know. And that inconsistency, I think, pushed the Chargers towards more of a passing game with Justin Herbert rather than more of a balanced game that they were looking for. And now the competition all of a sudden this year looks very steep. You know, Najee Harris, Omarion Hampton, Kamani Vidal, Hassan Haskins, Rocket Sanders. It looks like a very, very full running back room. And so to put Kamani Vidal's name on this list, very tricky one with many moving parts. And maybe one of the hottest takes on this list. I think this one and the next one. And it's because, in my opinion, Kamani Vidal is a very decent backup, like a great, as a matter of fact, in some situations. He's an awesome pass protector. He's decent in the receiving game. There's a lot going for him. And I don't want him to get cut. Let's be clear with that. Just because he's on this list doesn't mean that I want him to get cut. And nor you can say the same for any of these guys. I'm just kind of trying to navigate the seas of roster construction here because it's rocky right now. And I think in the case of Kamani Vidal, it's because there's another back that has taken the preseason by storm. His name is Rocket Sanders. Man, dude, we knew Rocket Sanders would be exciting. At one point, he was one of the best backs in the league, but I think fumbling issues, and I think there were some availability issues in there, faded him quite dramatically, I'm going to say. And now that the Chargers have him, I think we're really starting to see that version of him come back. Rocket Sanders has been absolutely awesome. He scored in both of the preseason games that he's played. He's looked tremendous in camp. Speed, agility, power, everything you're looking for from a backup. Rocket has really checked a lot of boxes for me. Meanwhile, Kamani Vidal, he's been good and bad. I feel like he started off really strong. That game versus the Lions was very impressive in that Hall of Fame game. 2 touchdowns. He was running hard. I think he had like 40 yards or somewhere in that realm. He looked great. But in my opinion, since then, he's kind of, tapered off. Feels like the yards per carry haven't been there. The offensive line has not been helping. I'm going to say that right now, too. Though the offensive line in these preseason games has been pretty dreadful. But despite that, Rocket has been good anyway. Now, yes, Vidal, I will say he's been excellent in pass protection. There was this one touchdown by Trey Lance in which Vidal, man, dude, whoo, he threw this guy up like it was a WWE match. It was awesome. And he's been very consistent in that realm, which, coaches are going to love. And it's a very, desirable trait for running backs. But in my opinion, the better running back with the football in their hands has been Rocket Sanders between the two of them. That makes this tough, man. Admittedly, this is going to be a very close race. I don't think it's definitive one way or the other. It's going to be a tough call for Jim Harbaugh because both have looked great, but I just don't think there is room for both Vidal and Rocket on the roster. I honestly don't know what the right call is here, man. I don't want to be the one having to make that decision. I love them both, but the upside of Rocket is very exciting. Do they roster 5? Maybe. I would doubt it. But there's one more scenario that could determine what happens with these players, and it's the final scenario on this list, and maybe the most shocking name you're going to see on this list. My last cut candidate for the Chargers this season is going to be Najee Harris, which, again, when I was going through the roster and looking for guys, I was like, maybe on the roster bubble, this and that, that were, notable. Najee, he did stand out to me, and honestly, I'm gutted to have included him because the whole idea of Najee Harris on the Chargers is awesome. But his situation right now is just shrouded in mystery. Of course, I'm talking about the eye injury that he sustained in a firework accident this last July. That sucks. Off the field stuff sucks. It was an accident. These things happen. But since then, Harris really hasn't been able to do much of anything. In practice, camp, preseason games, nothing. And this is starting to become very worrisome. Because Najee was one of the biggest signings in free agency for the Chargers. I was excited, man. There's a lot going for him here. Chargers being who they are, offensive coordinator and Jim Harbaugh, lining up with his talents. It sucks. It really does suck, man. Don't get me wrong. We want Najee on the field. His pairing with Amar Hampton carries so much potential. It takes a big load off of the rookie's shoulders, lets him develop the right way. You have this very consistent, unrelenting force of running back on the field at all times. Helps you get in control of games late. I don't know, but that eye injury, it's just too unpredictable. Due to the amount of blood vessels and the cornea sensitivity, all that kind of stuff, he's really not able to add much impact to his life right now. It's a real life thing. You don't want to risk it. I don't want his vision to be in danger because of the game. It's not worth it. But you look at his situation at running back all of a sudden, you pair that, his situation with the fact that the Chargers running back room looks very full, the ascension of Rocket Sanders, you're not going to want to, cut Kamani Vidal. It would be a crazy move. Not impossible. It would be crazy, and that's why I had to include his name on the list. Maybe there is something more permanent there that we don't know about. More than likely, and this is what I'm hoping the worst-case scenario is for him at this point, is that he starts on the NFI list, right, where he's exempt. He's not on the 53, but he's not cut. And we do get to keep, Vidal and Rocket and all these guys and wait for Najee Harris to hopefully heal up after a few weeks. It would be, at least 4 weeks at that point. That maybe is kind of what we're hoping for right now, because these things very unpredictable and it's very unfortunate, but I don't want that to end up happening. I want Najee Harris to be on the field with Amari and Hampton by like mid-season. Things are looking good, very consistent, and his vision is in no way, shape, or form in danger. But you guys let me know some of your cut candidates for this season. There's a lot of rookies that are looking awesome, like I mentioned, in the rookies and Luke Grimm and of course the guys that are obviously staying on the roster with Trey Harris and Keandre Lambert-Smith. But even some of the undrafted guys, there's some surprising number of undrafted guys that look pretty good this year, like Nico Reed, Eric Rogers, Rocket Sanders, that I think, all have a possibility of making the 53. Those might be some of the more surprising cuts, if I'm being honest, due to how many really good ones are out there. You're going to see guys like, Campbell cut and Grimm cut, and maybe even Rocket Sanders gets cut, just because, the position's too full. You would hope to expect to see those guys back on the practice squad and not get poached, but, it's going to be crazy. So you guys just be bracing yourselves. Be ready for it. Next week is when that deadline is. And let me know who some of the guys you think might be on the bubble for that. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining me. This has been The Director. If you like what you saw here, hit us up with a like and sub on your way out. We'll catch you guys next time. As always, bolt up and stay frosty.